My name is Melissa Carter. I'm 32 years old, a marketing consultant who built my own empire from nothing in the heart of Arizona. I grew up in a dusty corner of Tucson, the daughter of a mechanic and a part-time bookkeeper, in a family that never had much but always dreamed big. My parents, Randy and Stephanie, ran a small auto shop that kept us scraping by, while my older sister Betty was the golden child, the one who always seemed to have it all together, the one who made it out and married into money. I was the other daughter, the one who didn't quite fit, who dared to dream beyond the family's expectations but never got the memo that I was supposed to stay small. On Christmas Eve 3 years ago, in the middle of a glittering holiday party at their sprawling Scottsdale mansion, my sister Betty and my parents tore into me, their words slicing through the festive cheer like a serrated knife, calling me worthless, a burden, a nobody who'd never amount to anything. But as their cruel laughter echoed through the room, a low rumble grew outside, and a fleet of luxury cars, Rolls-Royce Phantoms, Bentleys, and a custom Cadillac Escalade rolled up to their doorstep, gleaming under the Arizona stars. Every single one mine. Proof that the woman they dismissed was about to change their world forever. Before we dive deeper into how I turned their scorn into my triumph, I want to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your city and country in the comments below, because I love hearing from you all. And if this story hits home, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, and leave a comment, because I've got something even bigger coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Now let me take you back to how a small-town girl from Tucson became the woman who brought a convoy of wealth to her family's doorstep, proving that the only thing worthless was their judgment of me. I grew up in a modest Tucson neighborhood where the sun baked the asphalt and dreams felt like luxuries we couldn't afford. My parents, Randy and Stephanie, poured everything into Carter's auto shop, a cinder-block building on the edge of town that smelled of oil and desperation. Det worked 18-hour days, his hands stained black, while Mom juggled the books and kept the coffee pot running for customers. Money was tight, but they always made sure we had enough love to go around. Betty, my older sister by 5 years, was their pride and joy. She got straight A's, married Ethan Powell, a real estate developer with a mansion in Scottsdale, and seemed to glide through life like she was born for it. I was the odd one out, the dreamer who spent hours sketching logos in my room, who wanted to build something big but never quite knew how to start. When I landed a job as a junior graphic designer at a small Tucson agency after college, I thought I was on my way. But to my family, it was just a cute hobby, not a real career. Betty would roll her eyes when I talked about my ideas for starting a marketing firm, saying, "Melissa, stick to something practical. You're not cut out for the big leagues." Mom and Dad would nod along, their disappointment clear when they compared my artsy job to Betty's perfect life. They wanted me to settle down, get a stable job, maybe marry someone like Ethan who could take care of me. But I wanted more. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own, that I didn't need anyone's charity to make it. That Christmas Eve party 3 years ago was supposed to be a celebration, a big family gathering at Betty and Ethan's mansion, with twinkling lights, a towering Christmas tree, and enough catered food to feed half of Scottsdale. The guest list was a who's who of Arizona's elite Judge Alvarez, a local power player, Mr. Larson, Ethan's business partner, Mrs. Harper, a socialite who planned every major event in town. I walked in wearing a red dress I'd saved up for months to buy, hoping to feel like I belonged. But from the moment I stepped through the door, I could feel the weight of their judgment. Betty, in her flawless designer gown, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Melissa, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with pity, like I was some stray who'd wandered in off the street. Mom pulled me aside early in the evening, her tone sharp as she whispered, "Try not to embarrass us tonight, okay? This isn't your little art gallery crowd." Dad just gave me a look, the one he used when I brought home a B instead of an A, and said, "Just smile and don't talk too much about your job. It's not like it's going anywhere." I swallowed hard, telling myself I could get through the night, that I could handle their comments. But I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The party was in full swing, with champagne flowing and a jazz trio playing holiday classics. When Betty took the stage in the grand living room, her diamond earrings catching the light, she raised a glass, her voice carrying over the crowd. "I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight to celebrate family and the spirit of giving," she said, all warmth and charm. "But before we get to the gifts, I have a special announcement." I stood near the back, holding a glass of wine, trying to blend in, when she turned her gaze on me. "As you all know, our family has always believed in lifting up those who need a hand. That's why, this Christmas, we're launching the Melissa Carter Christmas Fund, a charity to help struggling young people from backgrounds like my sister's people who need a little extra support to get by." The room erupted in polite applause, but her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was calling me a failure, a charity case, right in front of 100 strangers, framing it as generosity. Mom stepped up next, her smile tight. "Melissa's always been a dreamer, but not everyone can make it on their own. This fund will give kids like her a chance to find their place, even if they don't have much to offer." Dad nodded, adding, "It's our way of giving back, helping those who haven't figured out how to succeed yet." The applause grew louder, but to me, it was a roar of humiliation. Each clap hammering home their message: I was nothing, a nobody they pitied, a burden they had to prop up. I stood there, my face burning, the wine glass heavy in my hand, as Betty's words echoed in my head: worthless, struggling, not much to offer. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to them, taking their subtle digs, their comparisons to Betty, their insistence that I'd never measure up. But this was different. This was public, deliberate, a spectacle designed to put me in my place. Judge Alvarez approached me after the speech, his tone dripping with condescension. "What a wonderful gesture your family's making, Melissa. It must feel good to know they're looking out for people like you." Miss Harper, the event planner, chimed in. "It's so touching to see your sister giving back to your community." My community, like I was some outsider, they'd graciously taken in. I managed a weak smile, muttering, "Thank you. It's very kind." But inside, I was unraveling. Betty caught my eye from across the room and gave me a little wave, like she'd just done me a favor. That's when I heard it, the low hum of engines outside, growing louder, cutting through the holiday chatter. Heads turned toward the windows as a line of cars pulled up to the mansion's circular driveway, their headlights slicing through the desert night. A Rolls-Royce Phantom led the pack, followed by a Bentley Continental, a custom Cadillac Escalade, and 2 Mercedes Maybachs, all gleaming like they just rolled off a showroom floor. The guests murmured, confused, as Ethan peered out the window and said, "Who the hell is that?" Betty laughed nervously, probably some rich friend of Ethan's showing off. But I knew the truth. Those cars were mine. Every single one. And they were about to find out exactly who I'd become. To understand how I went from that humiliating Christmas Eve to owning a fleet of luxury cars that rolled up to my family's doorstep, I need to take you back to where it all began, to the roots of my story in Tucson, Arizona, and the years of being the family's disappointment that shaped me into the woman who'd one day turn their world upside down. Growing up in our little house on Saguaro Lane, I was always the oddball, the one who didn't quite fit into the Carter family mold. My parents, Randy and Stephanie, had built Carter's auto shop from scratch, pouring every ounce of their energy into keeping it afloat. It was a gritty, no-frills business that kept the lights on, but never left much room for extras. Dad would come home late, his clothes smelling of motor oil, while Mom spent her evenings hunched over spreadsheets, trying to make the numbers add up. They were proud people, hardworking, but their dreams for us were practical. Get a steady job, marry well, don't aim too high. Betty, my older sister, was their golden ticket. She was the one who aced every test, charmed every teacher, and eventually caught the eye of Ethan Powell, a real estate developer whose name was plastered on half the new subdivisions in Scottsdale. To them, Betty was proof they'd done something right, while I was the question mark, the daughter who spent her evenings doodling business logos instead of studying for a real career. I wasn't a rebel. Not really. But I had dreams that didn't line up with their version of success. While Betty was planning her wedding to Ethan, I was working late at a small Tucson marketing agency, designing flyers for local taco joints and car washes. Convinced I could build something bigger, I'd talk about starting my own firm, something that could help small businesses like Dad's shop stand out against the big chains. But every time I brought it up, Betty would laugh, her voice sharp enough to cut. Melissa, you're dreaming too big for someone with no connections. She'd say over Sunday dinner, while Mom nodded and added, why don't you focus on something stable, like Betty did? Dad would just grunt, his way of saying I was wasting my time. Their words stung, but I kept at it, taking night classes in digital marketing, saving every penny from my paycheck, believing I could prove them wrong. When I landed my first big client, a local brewery that doubled its sales after my rebranding campaign, I thought they'd finally see my potential. Instead, Betty smirked and said, that's cute, but it's not like you're changing the world. Mom and Dad agreed, their silence louder than any criticism, and I started to wonder if maybe they were right. If maybe I was chasing something I'd never catch. Meeting Ethan's circle didn't help. When Betty married into the Powell family, I got a front row seat to Arizona's high society people who owned ranches bigger than our neighborhood, who threw parties with guest lists that included mayors and judges. I'd tag along to their events, feeling like an outsider in my off-the-rack dresses, while Betty floated through the room in designer heels, her arm linked with Ethan's, his parents, Clara and George Powell, were old money types. The kind who'd look at you and instantly know your bank balance. Clara had this way of asking about my job. So, you do little drawings for businesses? That made it sound like I was playing with crayons. George would pat my shoulder and say, don't worry about climbing the ladder too fast. Kid, you've got time to figure it out. They're friends. People like Judge Alvarez and Mrs. Harper treated me the same, like I was Betty's charity project. The little sister they had to tolerate. I'd try to talk about my work, my ideas for helping small businesses, but they'd steer the conversation to Ethan's latest development deal or Betty's charity galas, as if my world didn't matter. You should take notes from your sister. Clara told me once, her smile tight. She knows how to play the game. Quote, despite it all, I kept pushing, believing if I worked hard enough, I'd earn their respect. I moved out of my parents' house and into a tiny apartment in Tucson, scraping by on my junior designer salary. While taking on freelance gigs to build my portfolio, I'd stay up until 2 a.m, designing websites for mom and pop shops, teaching myself social media strategies, dreaming of the day I'd have my own agency. But every family gathering was a reminder of how far I was from their idea of success. At Thanksgiving, Betty would brag about Ethan's new office park, while Mom would ask why I hadn't found a nice guy with a real job yet. Dad would chime in, you're too old to be chasing fantasies. Melissa, look at Betty, she's set for life. Their words built a wall between us, brick by brick, and I started to feel like I was fighting a losing battle. Not just against their expectations, but against the doubt they'd planted in me. I loved them. I really did. But I was starting to hate the version of myself I became around them. Small, apologetics, always trying to prove I was worth something. The years before that Christmas Eve party were a slow grind of trying to fit into their world while holding on to my own. I'd show up to their events, smile through their backhanded compliments, and bite my tongue when Betty introduced me as my little sister who's still figuring things out. I thought if I could just get one big break, one client that made them see me differently, they'd stop looking at me like a failure. I landed a contract with a Tucson bakery, Rosa's Cantina, and turned their struggling business into a local hotspot with a new logo and a social media campaign that went viral. I brought the numbers to a family dinner, proud of the $10,000 in new sales I'd helped generate. But Betty just raised an eyebrow and said, "That's nice, but Ethan closed $1 million deal last week." Mom and Dad nodded. Like that settled it. Like my work was pocket change compared to their golden child's. I started to wonder if I'd ever be enough, if I'd spend my whole life chasing their approval, only to come up short. But I kept going, because giving up would mean admitting they were right. And I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. That Christmas Eve was the breaking point. The moment when their quiet disapproval turned into something sharper, something public. I'd spent weeks preparing for the party, hoping it might be a chance to show them I was more than their punching bag. I'd saved up for that red dress, practiced small talk, even rehearsed answers to the inevitable questions about my little job. But as soon as I walked into that mansion, I knew I was out of my depth. The guests were all Ethan's people, real estate moguls, locale politicians, people who spoke in dollar signs and power moves. I tried to hold my own, chatting with Mr. Larson about small business marketing, but he cut me off with, "That's sweet, but let's talk about something that matters." Like Ethan's new project. Betty pulled me aside before dinner, her voice low. "Don't try so hard. Melissa, you're embarrassing yourself." I wanted to disappear, to crawl back to my apartment, and forget I'd ever thought I could belong here. But I stayed, because I'd promised Mom I'd be there, because I still believed, deep down, that I could change their minds. I had no idea that night would be the end of one life and the start of another, that their cruelty would light a fire in me that no amount of their doubt could extinguish. The Christmas Eve party at Betty and Ethan's Scottsdale mansion was supposed to be a night of holiday magic, with twinkling lights and warm smiles, but it turned into a public execution of my self-worth, orchestrated by my own family with a precision that left me reeling. I stood in that grand living room, surrounded by Arizona's elite, clutching my wine glass as Betty's announcement about the Melissa Carter Christmas Fund echoed in my ears, branding me as the family's charity case in front of 100 strangers. The jazz trio's holiday tunes couldn't drown out the sting of her words, and as the guests clapped for my sister's so-called generosity, I felt the weight of every eye in the room, judging me, pitying me. I wanted to scream, to tell them I wasn't the failure they thought, but I just stood there, frozen. While the party swirled around me, Betty had planned every detail of this night, from the catered hors d'oeuvres to the perfectly decorated tree, and I realized now that humiliating me was part of her script, a way to keep me in my place while she basked in her role as the family's shining star. Dinner was announced, and we moved to the dining room, a cavernous space with a long mahogany table set with crystal and gold-rimmed plates. I sat near the end, between Mrs. Harper, the event planner who'd helped organize the evening, and Judge Alvarez, whose presence seemed to elevate the whole affair. The conversation flowed around me. All talk of Ethan's latest real estate deals and Betty's charity work, while I picked at my roasted duck, trying to blend into the background. Mrs. Harper leaned over, her perfume overwhelming, and said, "It's so wonderful what your family's doing with that fund. Dear, it must mean so much to you, knowing they're helping people from your background." Her smile was kind, but her words cut deep, framing me as someone who needed saving. I managed a nod and a quiet, "It's very thoughtful," but my stomach twisted. Judge Alvarez chimed in, his voice booming. "Your sister's got a big heart. stepping up for folks who haven't had her opportunities. He patted my arm, like I was a child who'd been given a gold star for showing up. I wanted to tell him I'd built campaigns that saved businesses, that I wasn't some lost cause, but I knew it wouldn't matter. To them, I was just Betty's little sister, the one who hadn't made it. As the meal progressed, Betty kept the spotlight on herself, regaling the table with stories of her latest charity gala. Her voice loud enough to carry over the clinking of silverware. Mom and Dad beamed at her, their pride obvious, while I sat there, invisible unless someone needed to make a point about their generosity. Dad caught my eye at one point and said, "You should take notes from Betty. Melissa, she knows how to make a difference." His tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "Would it felt like a slop?" Mom nodded, adding, "We've always told you, focus on what's realistic. Not everyone can be like your sister." Their words weren't new, but hearing them in front of this crowd, with chandeliers sparkling above us and waiters circling like hawks, made them heavier, sharper. I tried to focus on my plate, to block out the noise, but then Betty stood again, holding a small velvet box, her face glowing with that rehearsed warmth she'd perfected. "I have one more surprise," Betty announced, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. "Melissa, come up here. Please." Me legs felt like lead, but I stood, walking to the front of the room where she waited, the box in her hand like a prop in her performance. The guests watched, their faces a mix of curiosity and amusement. As she continued, "We all know Christmas is about giving, and our family wants to show Melissa how much we believe in her potential." She opened the box, revealing a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Carter Family Hope." "This is a symbol of our commitment to helping you find your way," she said, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "We know you've struggled, but we're here to lift you up." The room clapped again, louder this time. As she slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, I wanted to rip it off, to throw it across the room, but I just stood there, my face burning. As she hugged me for the crowd, "Isn't she just so grateful?" Betty said, turning to the guests, who nodded like this was the sweetest moment they'd ever seen. I mumbled a thank you, my voice barely audible, and made my way back to my seat, the bracelet feeling like a shackle. "Mrs." Harper leaned in again, whispering, "That was so touching. Melissa, your family really knows how to make a statement." I nodded, my throat tight. As Judge Alvarez added, "It's rare to see such dedication to family, even for someone who's still finding their path." Their words were meant to be kind, but they were knives, each one carving away at the person I'd been trying to become. Betty sat back down, her smile triumphant, and whispered to Ethan, loud enough for me to hear, "She'll thank us one day when she realizes she needed this." Mom and Dad nodded, their faces glowing with approval, as if they'd just solved the problem of me. I looked around the table, at the faces of people who saw me as a project, a failure they'd graciously taken under their wing. And something inside me snapped not in anger, but in clarity. This wasn't just a bad night. This was their plan. To keep me small. To make sure I never outshone their carefully crafted narrative. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I smiled through the dessert course, nodded at the right moments, and pretended to laugh at Ethan's jokes about his latest golf game. But inside, I was done. Done pretending I could win their approval. Done letting their words define me. As the guests started to leave, offering their final condolences disguised as compliments. "You're so lucky to have such a supportive family. This fund will really make a difference for people like you." I slipped out to the patio, needing air, needing space. The Arizona night was cool, the stars sharp against the dark sky, and for a moment, I let myself imagine a life where I wasn't the Carter family's disappointment. I thought about Rosa's cantina, the bakery I'd helped turn around, and Javier's auto shop, where my flyers had brought in new customers. I'd done that. Not Betty. Not Mom. not Dad. Me. And yet, here I was, letting them reduce me to a sob story for their rich friends to applaud. As I stood there, Ethan stepped outside, a glass of bourbon in his hand. "Rough night." "Huh?" he said, his tone almost sympathetic. "You know, Betty just wants what's best for you. We all do." I looked at him, this man who'd married my sister and bought into her version of me, and said, "If this is what's best, then I don't want it." His eyebrows shot up. But before he could respond, I walked back inside, past the remnants of the party, past Betty's smug smile and Mom's concerned glance. I grabbed my coat and left without saying goodbye. The bracelet still on my wrist, a reminder of everything I was leaving behind. That night, driving back to my tiny Tucson apartment, I made a promise to myself. I was done being their charity case. I was going to build something so big, so undeniable, that they'd have to see me for who I really was. And 3 years later, when that fleet of luxury cars rolled up to their doorstep, they'd learn just how wrong they'd been. Driving away from Betty and Ethan's Scottsdale mansion that Christmas Eve, the silver bracelet on my wrist felt like a brand, a cold reminder of the role my family had assigned me: failure. Charity case. The daughter who'd never measure up. The Arizona highway stretched out before me, dark and endless. And as the city lights faded in my rearview mirror, something shifted inside me. Not just anger or hurt, but a clarity I'd never felt before. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life begging for their approval, reshaping myself to fit their idea of who I should be. I was done with their pity, their condescension, their carefully staged humiliations. That night, in the quiet of my cramped Tucson apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to rebuild my life, not for them, but for me, to prove that I was worth more than their cruel words could ever define. It wasn't going to be easy. I had no safety net. No rich husband. No family cheering me on. But I knew if I didn't walk away from their shadow now, I'd lose myself forever. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up to the sound of church bells drifting through my apartment's thin walls. But the holiday spirit felt distant, replaced by a burning determination. I sat on my second-hand couch, staring at the bracelet they'd given me. Its engraved words, "Carter Family Hope," mocking me with every glint of light. I slipped it off and tossed it into a drawer, promising myself I'd never wear it again. My apartment was a far cry from Betty's mansion, a 500-square-foot box with a leaky faucet and a window that overlooked a parking lot. My bank account wasn't much better. $3,000 in savings, barely enough to cover rent and groceries for a couple of months. My job at the marketing agency paid enough to get by, but it wasn't the kind of money that could fund a big dream. And my freelance work, the side gigs I'd been so proud of, had dried up as I'd spent more time trying to please my family than building my portfolio. The reality was brutal. I'd let their doubts creep into my head, let their voices convince me to play small, and now I was starting from scratch. I opened my laptop, the one piece of equipment I'd invested in, and started taking stock of what I had. My graphic design skills were solid, but the industry had moved fast in the 3 years I'd been distracted by family obligations. Digital marketing was now king: social media campaigns, SEO, targeted ads, and I was behind the curve. My old clients, like Rosa's Cantina, had moved on to bigger agencies or younger designers who worked for less. My portfolio felt outdated. A collection of flyers and logos that screamed small time, but I wasn't ready to give up. I thought about the bakery I'd helped, how Rosa's face lit up when customers started lining up after my campaign. And I knew I could do that again. Not just for one business, but for dozens, maybe hundreds. I wanted to build a marketing firm that helped small businesses like my parents' auto shop, places that had heart and hustle but couldn't afford the glossy agencies Betty and Ethan hired. It was a risky idea, one that could leave me broke and alone, but it was mine. and that was enough to keep me going. I started small, reaching out to old contacts from my agency days. Most didn't respond, either they'd forgotten me or assumed I'd quit the game, but a few were curious. I called up Sofia Torres, a college friend who'd started a boutique marketing firm in Phoenix. She'd always been the one pushing me to think bigger. Back when we'd stay up late, dreaming about running our own companies. "You're calling me now?" Sophia said when I reached her. Her voice warm but skeptical. "I thought you were busy playing the good sister at those fancy Scottsdale parties." I laughed, but it was hollow. "I'm done with that," I said. "I want to get back to work. Real work, helping small businesses grow. But I need advice. I'm starting over." Sophia didn't sugarcoat it. "The market's brutal. Melissa, you're competing with kids fresh out of school who'll work for peanuts, and big agencies with budgets you can't touch. You've got talent, but you're rusty. You need to rebuild your skills and your network. Fast." Her words were tough, but they lit a fire in me. She agreed to meet for coffee the next week, promising to share some industry contacts if I could prove I was serious. Over the next few days, while my family was probably opening gifts and toasting their perfect lives, I locked myself in my apartment, signing up for online courses in digital marketing and brushing up on design software I hadn't touched in years. I spent hours watching tutorials on social media algorithms, studying case studies of successful small business campaigns, and sketching out ideas for a new kind of marketing firm, one that didn't charge thousands for services most clients couldn't afford. My parents called once, probably expecting me to apologize for leaving the party early, but I let it go to voicemail. Betty texted a curt, "Hope you're okay? Let's talk soon." But I ignored it. I wasn't ready to face them, not until I had something to show for myself. Instead, I reached out to Javier Morales, who ran an auto shop not far from my parents' place. I'd done some flyers for him a couple of years back, and he'd been happy with the results. "Javier, I'm going freelance again." I told him over the phone, "Can I design something for you?" "No charge, just to get my name out there." He hesitated, then said, "Sure, why not? Business is slow, and I could use the help." Quote, working with Javier was my first step back. His shop was struggling against a new chain that had opened nearby, with flashy signs and a big advertising budget. I spent a weekend at his garage, talking to his customers, watching how he worked, and learning what made his business special: honest service, fair prices, a guy who knew every customer's name. I designed a new logo, set up a simple website with customer testimonials, and launched a social media page highlighting his work, all for free. It wasn't much, but when Javier called me 2 weeks later, his voice excited, saying, "Melissa, we got 10 new customers this week because of that website. I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years." That spark grew into a plan. I'd focus on businesses like Javier's, places that didn't need charity but a chance to compete. I'd build a firm that offered affordable, effective marketing, something that could level the playing field for people who'd been counted out, just like me. The weeks that followed were a blur of late nights and early mornings. I took every free course I could find, from Google Ads to content strategy, and started cold emailing small businesses in Tucson: diners, hair salons, family-owned hardware stores. Most didn't reply, but a few took a chance. I worked for next to nothing, building my portfolio one project at a time, each one a brick in the foundation of something bigger. Sophia introduced me to a couple of her old clients, including a daycare run by a woman named Maria Gonzalez. "I can't pay much," Maria said when we met, "but I need a way to stand out against the big chains moving in." I created a branding package for her new signs, a website, a loyalty program for parents, all for $500, a fraction of what bigger agencies charged. When Maria's enrollment jumped by 20%, she referred me to 3 other business owners. Slowly, word started to spread, and I began to see a path forward. Not just to prove my family wrong, but to build something that mattered. It wasn't glamorous. I lived on instant noodles and bus fares. My social life reduced to coffee meetings with potential clients. My apartment became my office. My kitchen table covered in sketches and post-it notes. Every dollar I earned went back into the business new software. A better printer. A cheap smartphone tripod for making pitch videos. I stopped going to family dinners. Stopped answering mom's calls about getting back on track. Betty sent one more text, saying, "You're being dramatic. Melissa, come talk to us." But I deleted it. I didn't need their validation anymore. I needed clients. Results. A reason to get up every morning. And for the first time in years, I had that. I was building something real. Something that wasn't defined by their expectations or their pity. That Christmas Eve had broken me, but it also set me free. And I was ready to show the world and my family what I was really capable of. With every new client I took on, every logo I designed, every social media campaign that brought customers through a small business's door, I felt myself stepping further away from the shadow of that Christmas Eve humiliation and closer to the person I'd always wanted to be. My tiny Tucson apartment, once a symbol of my family's disappointment in me, transformed into a command center for my growing marketing firm. With papers strewn across the table and my laptop glowing late into the night, I wasn't just building a business, I was building a life, one where I called the shots, where my worth wasn't measured by Betty's standards or my parents' expectations. Over the next 2 years, I poured everything into Carter Creative Solutions, the name I gave my company, a quiet nod to the family I'd left behind, but also a declaration that I was rewriting their story of me. I focused on small businesses across Arizona: diners, auto shops, family-run boutiques, places that reminded me of my parents' struggles, places that had grit and heart, but lacked the tools to compete with the big players. Each project was a chance to prove that I wasn't the failure they'd branded me. And with every success, I felt a piece of myself coming back to life. The early days were a grind. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, brew a pot of cheap coffee, and spend hours researching local businesses, cold calling owners who were often too busy or skeptical to listen. "Why should I trust you?" one owner, Carlos Rivera, asked when I pitched a rebrand for his struggling taco stand. "You're just one person, not some big agency." I convinced him to let me try, offering a basic logo and a social media plan for $300, barely enough to cover my time. I spent a week at his stand, learning what made his food special, the recipes passed down from his grandmother, the way he greeted every customer like family. I designed a vibrant logo, set up an Instagram page with photos of his sizzling tacos, and ran a targeted ad campaign that cost less than his weekly tortilla order. When Carlos called me a month later, saying, "We're packed every night now, thanks to you," I knew I was onto something. That win led to more referrals, and soon I was working with a dry cleaner in Tempe, a Decisive Mesa, and a hardware store in South Tucson, each one teaching me how to turn a small budget into big results. Money was tight, but I stretched every dollar, reinvesting my fees into better tools, a new design program, a faster laptop, a basic CRM system to track clients. I moved out of my cramped apartment and into a slightly larger one-bedroom in Tucson's Barrio Viejo, a neighborhood full of colorful adobe houses and small businesses, like the ones I served. The new place had a small balcony where I'd sit at night, sketching ideas under the desert stars, feeling a kind of freedom I'd never known in my family's world. I stopped checking Betty's social media, stopped listening to Mom's voicemails about coming back to the family, and ignored Dad's occasional texts asking if I was still doing that art thing. My world was my work now, and it was growing faster than I dared hope. By the end of my first year, I had 12 steady clients, enough to quit my agency job and go full-time with Carter Creative Solutions. I hired a part-time assistant, Elena Torres, a friend from college who'd always believed in my vision. You're building something real, she told me over coffee one day. This isn't just about proving them wrong, it's about proving you right. The second year was when things really took off. I started targeting businesses that were doing well but wanted to grow, like a family-owned gym in Chandler that couldn't compete with the national chains. I met with the owner, Sofia Hernandez, who said, "We've got loyal customers, but we're losing new ones to those fancy gyms with their slick ads." I spent days observing her gym, talking to her trainers, understanding what made it special, the community vibe, the personal attention. I created a full rebranding package, a new website with video testimonials, a social media campaign showcasing real members' stories, and a referral program that rewarded loyalty. The cost was $2,000, a fraction of what big agencies charged, but the results were undeniable. Sophia's membership doubled in 3 months. She referred me to a catering company, which led to a coffee shop, then a landscaping business. My client list grew to 25, and I raised my rates, not because I was greedy, but because I was delivering results that justified it. I wasn't just designing logos anymore. I was helping businesses find their voice, their edge, their place in a market that often overlooked them. I started speaking at local business events, sharing tips on low-cost marketing strategies, showing owners how to use free tools like Google Analytics or Instagram Reels to compete with the big dogs. At one event, a woman named Rosa Hernandez, who owned a Mexican bakery in Tucson, approached me after my talk. "You're the one who helped Carlos with his taco stand," she said, her eyes bright. "Can you do that for me? I want to open a second location, but I don't know how to get the word out." We worked together for weeks, building a brand that highlighted her bakery's authentic recipes and family history. I designed new packaging, launched a social media campaign with mouthwatering photos of her conchas, and set up a crowdfunding page to help fund her expansion. When her second location opened to a line around the block, she hugged me and said, "You didn't just help my business, you gave me my dream back." Those moments, those wins, were worth more than any paycheck, more than any approval my family could have given me. By the end of year 2, Carter Creative Solutions had a reputation in Tucson and beyond. I moved my office to a small space in downtown Tucson, a renovated warehouse with exposed brick, and enough room for a team of 4: Elena, a graphic designer named Javier Morales, a social media specialist named Mia Lopez, and me. We were handling 30 clients, from mom and pop shops to mid-sized businesses ready to scale. Our revenue hit 7 figures, a number that would have made Betty choke on her champagne. But it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the impact, about helping people like Rosa and Carlos and Sofia build something lasting. I'd created a model that worked, affordable, results-driven marketing that didn't rely on flashy overhead or empty promises. I was living on my terms, in a world I'd built, surrounded by people who valued what I brought to the table. For the first time, I felt whole, not because I'd proven my family wrong, but because I'd proven to myself that I was enough. Still, there were moments when the past crept in. I'd see a news article about Ethan's latest real estate project, or mom would leave a voicemail saying, "We miss you. Melissa, come to dinner." I'd delete them, not out of anger, but because I didn't need their validation anymore. My life was full client meetings, late-night strategy sessions, the thrill of seeing a campaign go viral, but deep down, I knew the real test was coming. The moment when I'd have to face them again, not as the sister they pitied, but as the woman who'd built an empire they couldn't ignore. I didn't know when or how it would happen, but I was ready, because every step I'd taken since that Christmas Eve had been toward a future where their words no longer defined me. 2.5 years after walking away from my family's judgment, I was sitting in my downtown Tucson office, reviewing a campaign proposal for a new client, a family-owned restaurant chain looking to expand across Arizona when my assistant, Elena, knocked on the door, her face unreadable. "You've got a call on line 1, she said, her voice steady but cautious. "It's Betty." My fingers froze on the keyboard. Betty. After 30 months of silence, no calls, no texts, not even a forwarded family Christmas card, my sister was reaching out. I'd spent those years building Carter Creative Solutions into a 7-figure business, helping small businesses thrive while my family remained a distant memory. Their voices no longer echoing in my head. But now, Betty's name brought back that Christmas Eve. The bracelet, the applause, the weight of their pity. I took a deep breath, nodded to Elena, and picked up the phone. My voice calm but firm. "Betty, what's this about?" Her response came, polished as ever but tinged with something new uncertainty. "I know it's been a while, but we need to talk. Can we meet at your office? It's about Dad's company." I leaned back in my chair, the Tucson skyline visible through my office window. A reminder of how far I'd come. Carter Creative Solutions now occupied a sleek third-floor space in a renovated warehouse, with a team of 10 and a client list that included some of Arizona's most promising small businesses. We'd built a reputation for turning underdogs into market leaders, and I'd done it without my family's money or approval. Betty's call wasn't just unexpected. It was a signal that something had shifted in their world, something big enough to make her swallow her pride and reach out to the sister she'd dismissed as worthless. "Thursday at 3, I said, keeping my tone professional. "I'll make time." She hesitated, then said, "Thank you. This means a lot." After hanging up, I called Sofia Torres, my friend and business mentor in Phoenix, to process what had just happened. "Betty Carter, calling you?" Sophia said, her voice thick with disbelief. "The same sister who turned your name into a charity fund? What's her angle?" I admitted I didn't know. I'd avoided news about my family, focusing on my own growth. But Sophia's advice was blunt. "Do your homework before that meeting. If she's coming to you, they're in trouble. Commerceline." That night, I dug into Carter Enterprises, my father's real estate company, which had grown from his auto shop into a mid-sized player in Arizona's commercial property market. What I found was a company on the brink. Their portfolio, mostly strip malls and office parks, had been hit hard by the shift to online retail and remote work. Tenants were leaving for newer buildings with better tech and flexible leases, while Carter Enterprises clung to outdated models, relying on Dad's old-school handshake deals and a reputation that no longer carried weight. Industry reports noted a 20% drop in tenant retention over 2 years, with new client acquisitions nearly non-existent. Articles in the Arizona Business Journal hinted at financial strain, with analysts suggesting the company needed a major overhaul or risked selling off assets to competitors. My father, Randy, had always prided himself on running a family business, but it was clear his traditional approach was failing in a market that demanded innovation. Betty, who joined the company as a vice president after marrying Ethan, was supposed to bring fresh ideas, but her focus on high society networking hadn't translated to actual growth. Thursday afternoon arrived, the desert sun blazing outside as I prepared for Betty's visit. I chose a navy blazer and slacks, professional but grounded, a far cry from the red dress I'd worn to her Christmas party. Elena escorted Betty into my office at exactly 3, and the woman who walked in wasn't the untouchable queen I remembered. Her designer dress was impeccable, her blonde hair perfectly styled, but her eyes carried a flicker of doubt I'd never seen before. "Your office is impressive," she said, glancing at the modern furniture and local artwork on the walls. "You've done well." I gestured to a chair, keeping my expression neutral. "Thanks. Coffee?" She nodded. And after Elena brought us cups, we sat across from each other. The same dynamic we'd had at countless family dinners. But now the power had shifted. I wasn't the little sister begging for approval. I was the expert she needed. Let's get to it, I said. What's going on with Carter Enterprises? Betty set her cup down, her fingers lingering on the handle. We're struggling, she admitted, her voice low. The market's changed, and we haven't kept up. Tenants are leaving. We're losing contracts, and our properties are seen as outdated. We've tried working with big marketing firms, but their ideas full rebrands. Expensive campaigns don't fit our reality. We need someone who can help us evolve without losing who we are. The irony hit me hard. She was describing exactly what I'd built my business on, helping companies stay true to their strengths while adapting to new markets. What specific issues are you facing? I asked. Leaning forward, she sighed, a rare crack in her polished facade. Our tenant retention is down 30%. New businesses aren't signing with us because our buildings lack modern amenities, high-speed internet, green certifications, and our marketing is non-existent. We've always relied on Dad's reputation, but that's not enough anymore. I nodded, processing her words. Carter Enterprises was in worse shape than I'd expected. Bleeding clients and relevance in a market that had passed them by. Why come to me? I asked, my tone even but curious. Betty met my gaze, her voice softer now. I've been following your work. Your clients' small businesses, family operations, they're thriving because of you. People in the industry talk about Carter Creative Solutions like it's a game changer. We need that kind of thinking. Her admission hung in the air, a quiet acknowledgement of the success she'd once mocked. I kept my face steady. But inside, I felt a surge of validation, not because she approved, but because she'd seen what I'd built. To help you, I said, I'd need full access to your financials, tenant feedback, and operations. Real change requires transparency, not just a shiny new logo. Betty nodded quickly. Whatever you need, we're open to it. I quoted my fee, $25,000 for the initial assessment, with implementation costs based on the scope of work. She didn't blink, just said, when can you start? I scheduled a preliminary analysis for the following week, promising a full report 10 days later. After she left, I sat in my office, staring at the city below, trying to wrap my head around the reversal. The sister who'd called me worthless was now asking for my help to save the family business. I called Sophia to debrief. They're desperate, she said, laughing. Betty Carter, begging you for expertise? That's poetic? I smiled. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about the work, about solving problems for businesses that needed it. Even if that business belonged to the family who'd tried to break me, the meeting with Betty wasn't just a business opportunity, it was a chance to show them, and myself, that I'd become someone they couldn't dismiss, someone whose value they'd have to reckon with. The meeting with Betty left me energized, not out of spite, but because it was a chance to tackle a challenge bigger than any I'd faced before, saving my family's failing business with the expertise they'd once mocked. Over the next week, I dove into Carter Enterprises operations, analyzing financial reports, tenant surveys, and market trends with my team at Carter Creative Solutions. What I uncovered was a company stuck in time, its strip malls and office parks crumbling under outdated infrastructure, and a marketing strategy that boiled down to my father's name and a dusty Rolodex. Tenants complained about slow maintenance, rigid lease terms, and buildings that lacked modern tech or energy efficiency. Competitors were eating their lunch, offering flexible spaces and digital-first marketing that Carter Enterprises couldn't match. I spent late nights in my Tucson office, crafting a plan that would drag them into the present without erasing their legacy. It was daunting, but it was also the kind of problem I'd built my career solving, and I was ready to show them what I could do. The following Friday, I walked into the Carter Enterprises headquarters in Scottsdale, a sleek glass building that screamed success but hid a sinking ship. The lobby hadn't changed since I'd last visited years ago, back when I was the disappointing daughter trailing behind Betty. Now, I was here as a consultant, my laptop loaded with a presentation that could make or break their future. My father, Randy, sat at the head of the conference table, his face lined with stress, while Betty and my mother, Stefania, flanked him. Ethan was there too, along with two board members I recognized from past family events, Mr. Larson, a real estate veteran, and Judge Alvarez, whose presence lent weight to the meeting. They nodded politely as I sat up, but the tension in the room was palpable. Randy spoke first, his voice gruff. "We're counting on you to give us something practical, not some fancy ad campaign we can't afford." I met his gaze, steady and professional. "I'm here to give you a plan that works, based on data and results, not flash." Quote, I launched into the presentation, projecting charts and case studies onto the screen. Carter Enterprises is losing ground because your properties don't meet modern business needs, I said, clicking to a slide showing tenant retention rates down 35%. Your buildings lack high-speed internet, sustainable features, and flexible spaces that today's companies demand. Your marketing relies on personal connections, but new clients research online first. And you're invisible there? Betty shifted in her seat, her lips tight, while Mom looked down at her hands. I outlined 3 core strategies: infrastructure upgrades, operational overhaul, and a digital marketing push. You need fiber optic internet, energy-efficient systems, and redesigned common areas for networking, I said, flipping to a cost breakdown. Estimated investment: $10 million over 18 months. It's steep, but losing more tenants will cost you double that in 2 years. For 1842 system. The artifact content has been cut off due to exceeding the maximum token length for this response. Below is the continuation of the artifact to ensure it is complete and properly formatted, adhering to all provided instructions. I launched into the presentation, projecting charts and case studies onto the screen. Carter Enterprises is losing ground because your properties don't meet modern business needs, I said, clicking to a slide showing tenant retention rates down 35%. Your buildings lack high-speed internet, sustainable features, and flexible spaces that today's companies demand. Your marketing relies on personal connections, but new clients research online first. And you're invisible there. Betty shifted in her seat, her lips tight, while Mom looked down at her hands. I outlined 3 core strategies: infrastructure upgrades, operational overhaul, and a digital marketing push. You need fiber optic internet, energy-efficient systems, and redesigned common areas for networking, I said, flipping to a cost breakdown. Estimated investment: $10 million over 18 months. It's steep, but losing more tenants will cost you double that in 2 years. For operations, I recommended shorter, flexible leases, a 24-hour maintenance response system, and tenant advisory boards to guide improvements. The marketing plan included a new website with virtual tours, targeted social media campaigns showcasing tenant success stories, and partnerships with local startup hubs to attract young businesses. Randy leaned forward, his brow furrowed. $10 million? That's a big ask. How do we know it'll work? I showed them case studies from my clients Rose's Cantina, Javier's auto shop businesses that had doubled their revenue with similar strategies. These aren't guesses, I said. They're proven models tailored to your market. Betty spoke up, her voice cautious. What's the timeline for seeing results? I clicked to a slide with a phased plan. You can launch digital marketing and basic upgrades in 60 days for early wins, with full transformation in 18 months. Mr. Larson asked about costs for ongoing support. Project-based consulting would run $75,000 for 6 months. I said, a full partnership, with me overseeing strategy and implementation, would be $12,000 monthly, plus bonuses tied to tenant retention and new leases. The numbers were bold, but they reflected the value I'd proven with every client I'd helped grow. The board asked sharp questions. probing timelines and risks, but I had answers backed by data and experience. As I wrapped up, Stephanie looked at me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen. "This is a lot to take in," she said, "but it's clear you know what you're doing." Randy nodded, his gruffness fading. "We need to discuss this privately, but can you join us for dinner tonight? We'd like to explore another option." I agreed, curious but guarded, and left them to deliberate. That evening, at a quiet steakhouse overlooking the Phoenix skyline, I sat across from Randy, Stefania, and Betty, the setting familiar from family dinners years ago. But the dynamic unrecognizable. Randy cut straight to it, his voice steady. "Your plan is solid, but we're thinking bigger. What if you took a 35% stake in Carter Enterprises as a managing partner, leading the transformation yourself?" The offer hit me like a freight train. 35% of a company worth millions, even in its weakened state, was a fortune. But more than that, it was a chance to reshape the family legacy that had once cast me out. Betty leaned in, her tone earnest. "You've proven you can turn businesses around. We need someone who gets our roots, but sees the future. That's you." I took a sip of water, steadying myself. I'd need full control over strategy, marketing, and operations, no interference. I said. Randy nodded. "Done," I added. "And I want community programs, affordable spaces for small businesses, mentorship for local entrepreneurs." Stefania smiled, a rare warmth in her eyes. "That sounds like something we should have done years ago." Quote, "Tvåvägslotter." I stood in the driveway of Betty and Ethan's Scottsdale mansion, the same place where they'd branded me worthless. 3 years earlier, a fleet of luxury cars, Rolls-Royce Phantom, Bentley Continental, Cadillac Escalade, and 2 Mercedes Maybachs rolled up behind me, their engines purring as I stepped out of the lead car in a tailored suit that cost more than my old apartment's rent. My family waited on the steps, in their faces a mix of shock and cautious hope, as I carried contracts that would make me a multi-million-dollar stakeholder in Carter Enterprises. The victory wasn't the wealth or the cars. It was knowing I'd earned this moment through my own work, my own vision, helping businesses grow and communities thrive. The girl they'd called a failure had become their partner, their savior, and the future of their legacy was now mine to shape.